Night folds itself around the old armory, gentle as breath, and he stands among wooden chests where lacquered plates sleep, listening to the faint hush of silk and cord, as if the suits themselves exhaled between dreams. For so long the world has pictured armour as a dungeon of iron, hulking, punitive, crushing a man until courage could only drag its feet. But he knows, the way a lantern knows its calm circle of light, that stories grow lighter when touched by truth. In the dim, steady glow, he lifts a cuirass, curved and layered, smelling of oil and long patience. And the revelation arrives at once, not a boulder, not a cliff on the shoulders, but something measured, poised, almost like a vow kept faithfully. The old masters had taught weight its manners. They married small scales into generous plates, slipped brigandine into quiet cloth, hinged hardness to suppleness so the whole could bow where the body bends. He imagines a rider at first light, kabuto settled, shikoro whispering at the nape, cords singing their tidy song of knots as he mounts with one smooth, remembered motion. The armour does not contradict him, it cooperates. That is the first secret. Too many tavern tales make a samurai a lumbering bell tolling across a field, yet bells hang still while men are seated inside the clever geometry of movement. The chest flexes with ribs that open and close like respectful doors. The skirt parts like dark reeds to let the thighs run. Sleeves gather and swivel with elbows that have not forgotten archery lessons from a kinder spring. Even the fierce mask, which to an untrained glance seems mere theatre, balances the helmet and grants the jaw its work without condemning the teeth to clench. He remembers a curator laughing softly, weighing a complete suit and saying it felt like a winter coat that kept its promise. Perhaps 20? Perhaps 30 kilograms. Not a mountain, but a plan. Heavy enough to matter, light enough to live in. And living inside it is the point. Because battle is not a painting of single blows, but a grammar of repeated gestures. Mounting and turning, loosening and tightening, advancing and sidestepping, sending an arrow into weather and calling the breath home. Prisons cannot conjugate such verbs. Garments can. He traces a finger along a shoulder of lambs, each piece overlapping like well-raised fish scales, each lacquered against the gossip of rain. The cords, indigo, persimmon, sometimes the old wine of cherries, do not dangle at leisure. They distribute strain, breathe with the hour, and keep the plates at courteous distances. He thinks of a bridge built from many modest decisions instead of one arrogant span, of a poem whose softness is strategy, word leaning on word until the crossing feels inevitable. So the walking tank fable loosens its grip. Men did not ride to danger to be trapped by their own care. They wore careful metal, the way a musician wears memory, so the fingers are free to play. And the land itself, steep ridges, rice paddy borders, woods that tangle the inattentive, punished clumsiness, faster than any foe. Armour that could not run, would not come home. Yes, there were smoky centuries when bullets argued with lacquer, and sometimes won. Suits learned scars where proof marks bloomed like small black suns. Yet even then, the makers kept asking the same disciplined question. How heavy is heavy enough, and how light remains loyal? Their answers were never boasts. They were measurements taken in footsteps and heartbeats, and the honest fatigue of miles. In the corner, a Yumi leans, tall as a confession, and he sees a rider drawing from the saddle. The bow wants no drama, it wants posture. Shoulders roll, scapulae slide, the chest flowers and settles again. All of it remains possible inside the suit, because the suit is an accomplice, not a jailer. He hears the first rumour of rain, then a mild occupation of surfaces. water darkens the lacing, pearls on the lacquer, and departs like a guest who knows when to leave. The armour does not surrender to misery. It remembers that war is a kind of weather and dresses with sense. He lowers the cuirass into its chest, and the soft click sounds like a kindly period at the end of a long, thoughtful sentence. Outside, the air smells faintly of pine smoke. Somewhere a small gate closes with unhurried care, mindful of sleeping children. He wonders how many myths are born of distance, centuries observed from too far away to notice the quiet engineering of mercy. A man who must move, breathe, bow, turn, ride and draw cannot wear a statue. He wears a tool, and tools, when loved by their makers, begin to lean toward grace. The room thins into stillness, one of those stillnesses that lets the mind leaf slowly through other pages. What did it feel like to run in greaves at twilight, to sense plates sliding in agreement with the pulse, to enter the press of bodies and hear the armour hum its private vows of protection? He humours the questions and does not rush their answers. He lets them approach like lanterns drifting down a slow river, each one brightening a different inch of water. And when the last light steadies upon its reflection, he senses the next myth standing politely by the door, patient, ready to be unknotted, under the same gentle lamp. He steps back from the chest and starts with a lighter sleeve. The kusazuri sighs as it brushes his wrist, and then a full suit rises on the stand, as if preparing to take a breath. He can't help smiling at the tavern tale that a man inside this shell would shuffle like furniture, fit only for slow corridors and careful chairs. Truth travels otherwise. It flows the way river stones shift when current insists, one after another, smooth, assured. Lamella lames overlap like disciplined fish, each plate preserving the dignity of its neighbour, while cords, lacquer-hard and patient as old bridges, let steel bow wherever the body bends. He remembers a fog-damp morning with a reenactor fastening his kabuto by feel, then easing into a jog that lengthened, unstartled, into a run. Not a racket of panic, only the tidy clink of promises kept on tempo. Knees lifted cleanly, hips turned, the skirt parted like reeds to let the thighs pass, the coat along the arms flexed where elbows negotiate. The dew refused to throttle the chest when breath needed to bloom. A jail cannot be so courteous, but a garment trained across centuries can. And when fashion later preferred broader plates braiding metal over the language of scales, the smiths did not forget motion's grammar. They riveted with foresight, they hinged with mercy, they stitched brigandine to cloth so a twist could remain a twist rather than a quarrel with one's own shell. He thinks of mounted dawns, a foot set in the stirrup without theatre, a leg swung over, a seat found in a single smooth sentence, reins calm, shoulders loose. The shikoro breaks the rein's small arguments. The menpo steadies the weight so the head can turn without complaint. And because posture is the bow's oldest ally, the yumi lifts, the spine lengthens. The left arm becomes a road, the right hand a quiet storm. And somewhere between horse and horizon, an arrow agrees to leave. Try to choreograph that inside a prison. The idea refuses you. Imagine it inside a living tool, and the mind nods. His fingertip traces the places where intention and engineering shake hands, the armpit guarded yet negotiable, the waist clasped but not trapped, greaves that caught the shin and never sulk when the ankle rolls. He recalls the sensible test, simple, unsentimental. Can a man in armour climb a leaf-slick slope, pivot toward a sound arriving from a blind corner, sprint the short distances that decide long afternoons? The answers survive in the shine worn bright at hinges, and the mat rubbed along habitual paths of motion, in lacing, replaced where years of breath have taught patience. And there is the land itself, terraced paddies, narrow woodland tracks, muddy ridge lines that punish clumsiness faster than any spear. If a suit had turned men to statues, the hills would have kept them forever. Instead, trails remember feet that came home. He thinks of late centuries when thunder learned powder and lead, when plates thickened and brigandine multiplied beneath sober cloth. Even then, the craft kept asking the same disciplined question: how do we honour movement without betraying safety? The replies were rarely loud. They hid in the angle of a hinge, the forbearance of a seam, the quiet arithmetic of weight spread across a body that must breathe, twist, kneel, and rise again. In the museum hush, he hears another room, a trainer's voice guiding a young archer, shoulders down, ribs soft, and the student, armoured, obeys without fuss. The bow speaks, the suit listens, the body translates for both. He steps back and watches the old doubt about running in armour loosen, like a ribbon coaxed by a kind wind. A dash across a courtyard becomes plausible. A sharp change of direction turns ordinary. Even a stumble is forgiven by clever joints that allow recovery before embarrassment becomes danger. He imagines rain joining the rehearsal, beating on lacquer, darkening the lacing, and movement remains, only slower, more deliberate, like careful handwriting that refuses to smudge. And if you're listening now in a dim room, eyes resting while the past arranges its soft furniture, let the myth fall away with your exhale. You could run in it, you could ride in it, you could raise the long bow and send your intention forward. If you're keeping me company tonight, tell me where you are and what time your clock is whispering. And if these quiet histories help you drift, you're warmly invited to subscribe to the entire history so we can meet again in the hush between days. He lowers the sleeve. The room answers with a small, agreeable click. Beyond the window, a path waits, mud honest with roots, and one can almost see the quick, light prints of greaves disappearing into the trees, like footsteps that remember their way home. He lingers beside the rack, where blades sleep in their scabbards, like quiet sentences awaiting the right breath, and he thinks about how often the tale has been told backward, as if a warrior in armour lived by the sword alone, drawing the katana the way thunder draws attention. Yet the field, waking beneath a pale veil of morning, speaks another grammar entirely. Out there, range is a kind of mercy, and discipline travels farther than bravado. He can almost see it now. The long, asymmetrical Yumi, rising taller than a man, its laminated curve drinking the first light. A mounted archer turning through the waist, like a small tide, so the bow can write its precise arc into cool air. In the soft thunder of hooves, arrows go first, persuading space to open, feathered syllables shaped by rhythms learned in childhood, and long before steel can argue in inches, wood, sinew, and patience make the opening case. On the ground, where breath braids with dust, the Yari speaks in an older cadence, spears as long as intentions, hafts braced into lines that do not flinch. A spear offers a man a broader horizon. It lets him meet danger before its heat can lick the face. The front rank kneels, the rear leans, and a thicket of points becomes one deliberate animal that refuses the more. Within that measured geometry, a single sword is a brave whisper in the presence of a choir. Eloquent? Yes, but lonelier than need requires. He pictures the naginata, curved blade on a staff, elegant as a reed with a secret, opening paths where cavalry must reconsider, teaching the feet to step and wheel and step again. In monasteries and hilltop keeps, he imagines hands, men's, and sometimes women's, settling on those long shafts with competent tenderness. The arc is not a flourish, but a memorandum to momentum, allowing leverage to complete what muscle begins. Through the centuries, early mornings, polearms keep their quiet promises. Thin the rush, hold the seam. By the breath a commander needs to rearrange a fate. Where then does the sword live within this ecology of distance and timing? He studies a scabbard whose lacquer has learned patience from palms and weather, and understands the answer is neither insult nor worship. The sword is a companion, close as a kept vow, loyal in corridors and alleys of the fight, trustworthy when formations tangle and the world shrinks to the width of a heartbeat. Sometimes it is drawn after the bow has finished its accounting, sometimes when the spear's long sentence is interrupted by the punctuation of chaos, sometimes when a gate finally yields and rooms replace horizons. In earlier centuries, a tachi might hang edge down at the rider's side for the saddle's grammar. Later, an uchigatana rides edge up at the hip for the quick prose of footwork. But even then, in those intimate arguments between lives, the sword is contingency, amendment, the paragraph you reserve for weather that changes its mind. He notes the noise movies borrow and the silence they forget. Steel on steel is not a choir, but a costly misunderstanding, for it bruises edges and wastes strength. True conversation finds the joints and the pauses, the little distances where footwork and intention reach through deliberate gaps. The sword is happy there, pragmatic, economical, uninterested in boasting, because its owner remains a student of range, not a worshipper of any single tool. A curator's gentle aside returns to him. You can tell which weapon ruled an afternoon by what the ground remembers. Arrowheads sleep in numbers. Spearheads turn up beside footprints that kept order. Sword nicks cluster where walls narrowed choices. Battlefields keep such diaries when wind forgets to erase them. And later, when powder darkened the air and bullets negotiated bluntly with lacquer and flesh, the logic of distance only hardened. Arquebuses spoke in rows, pikes answered with forests, and commanders learned to choreograph thunder. The sword, faithful as ever, waited for the moment when formations blurred and the human scale returned, then went to work without complaint. If you are listening now in a dim room, letting your eyes rest while history hums at the edge of sleep, feel how the myth shrinks as the field grows clear. The katana was beloved, and it knew poems of honor by heart. But the battlefield's long breath belonged to the Yumi, the Yari, and the Naginata. If you'd like to keep me company, tell me where you're listening from tonight, and what time your clock is whispering, and if this gentle untying of old stories feels like a safe place to drift, you're warmly invited to subscribe to the entire history so our lantern can find you again in the quiet between busy days. He lets his palm rest a last moment on the scabbard, in thanks for knowing its role, and in the hush he hears a line of spears settling into their calm, collective breath. Somewhere beyond the door, dawn is already measuring distance with its careful, faithful stride. He turns the blade so that a strip of moonlight, real or remembered, walks the edge, and he smiles at how a single exaggeration can populate a century, that clean fantasy of steel shearing steel, a katana cleaving a breastplate, the way a knife makes a fool of fruit. But the field is not a theatre for miracles. It is a classroom where physics and patience assign the seats. Armour is built to disagree with slashes. Kozane's scales overlapped like rain-wise roof tiles and lacquered until water lost its curiosity. Broader itamono plates curved and riveted into a chest that understands where ribs must bloom. Brigandine concealed beneath cloth. Karuta squares like little playing cards. Kiko hexagons tessellated into a well-mannered hive, each system turning one dramatic cut into a committee of smaller questions until momentum tires and the edge begins to think. Strike such surfaces square, and the sword does not write poetry. It spends itself. Edges chip or bend or skate away, and the sound, no silver scream, just a tired thud, feels like the day, reminding the hand to aim more wisely. So he studies the armpits' clever coverage, the hips' articulate skirts, the little negotiations at the throat where the menpo hands life back to air, and he remembers what old teachers said about armoured fighting. Don't argue with the door. Go where the house must exhale. Cuts belong not on the proud face of plates, but in the grammar of their joints, between sewed and sleeve, under a chin during a turn, in the elbow's brief humility, behind the knees' small bow, at laces where two promises overlap and borrow a breath. Techniques favoured diagonals that slide. Kesagiri across the shoulder line when a bind stumbles open, a close thrust, tsuki, when timing folds an opponent inward, and when breath compressed into wrestling, the sword yielded its pride to blunter honesty. The short, thick-spined yoroi doshi for prying seams, a modest tanto that refused theatre. Even the much-debated kabutawari, more chisel and club than legend, meant to worry straps and hinges rather than split bowls forged to defy such hubris. Surviving suits keep the minutes, lacquer scuffed where cloth meets metal, dents that stopped a blow's vocabulary before it learned to speak in paragraphs. Inside the do, a common-sense geography of padding that demotes slashes from verdicts to inconveniences. Later centuries add their footnotes. Tamashi, marks where bullets were tested. Small black starbursts crimped around dents that did not capitulate. If lead must negotiate, and sometimes fails, a sword should not boast. This is not an insult to the blade. It is a refinement of its manners. The katana shines where flesh and intention and timing coexist, not in arguments with machines designed to contradict it. On real afternoons, mud busy underfoot, sweat confusing the grip, air braided with dust, a swordsman hunts angles, cultivates feet, practices the small arithmetic of posture that makes an opening appear. Imagine two armoured men entering the intimate weather of Tsubazerii, guards kissing, weight nosing for that unguarded breath, a twist to tilt-a-world, the kashira nipping a faceplate, a heel stealing a stance, then the cut, not against iron, but into the human intervals iron cannot reach. Even the blade's very shape confesses this philosophy. Resilient rather than invincible, a curve meant to draw through compliant matter rather than crash against obstinate plate. On nights when stories grow too loud, people forget that smiths and armourers were colleagues, rivals only the way two good bridges might compete for a river's gratitude. One asked, "How do I escort a man through a day?" The other replied, "How do I complete what his feet began?" Gunpowder's smoke thickened, plates grew soberly heavier, brigandine multiplied, and schools adapted without melodrama. More grappling in armour, more feints that begin as theatre and end as geography, more trust in the moment after first collision when a body accidentally reads its weakest page aloud. If you're listening now, somewhere between waking and that safer shore beyond it, let the myth unclench in your hands. Sound armour does not surrender to a dramatic slice. It disperses drama until the edge grows modest. The true art is reading the suit like a landscape, ridges and gullies and little gates, and choosing paths that respect physics while escorting intention to a human place. If your eyes are heavy, tell me where you're listening from and what time your room is keeping for you tonight. And if these gentle untanglings help you drift, you're warmly invited to subscribe to the entire history, so our small lantern can find you again in the quiet. He sets the blade down and studies the breastplate one more time. It does not look like a victim dreaming of legends, but like a calm elder refusing gossip. Outside, the wind forgets itself in the bamboo and then remembers. And in the lacquer's reflection, he sees a patient river of cuts choosing honest crossings, while the cool, well-made stones keep their counsel under the moon. He lifts a shoulder guard and turns it slowly in his hands, and the rumour of bamboo armour thins and drifts away like noon mist, leaving a pond. From a distance, the laced rows may resemble reeds or woven slats, and so the tale was born. But in the palm, the truth is weightier and more patient. Here are the small metal kozane, overlapped like disciplined roof tiles and lacquered until rain grows bored. Here are the later, broader itamono plates, shaped and riveted, so stress learns to travel and die before it reaches bone. Leather is present, yes, but as a courteous intermediary, a facing to quiet shine, a binding where sharp edges might quarrel with cloth, a supple hinge where a rigid joint would insult the body's grammar. He rubs a thumb over a darkened strip and thinks of Nerigawa, hardened hide that stiffens a visor's margin or lends a gauntlet a more obedient angle. And even then the core promise of survival remains iron and steel. Perhaps the myth lingers, because bamboo sings a prettier poem, nature lending her ribs to shield her sons. But the battlefield is a strict editor and keeps only what brings a man home. Metal holds a line against slashes, spreads the violence of a blow into a democracy of smaller arguments, and once lacquer tutors it against whether the suit keeps breathing through monsoons and marches. He traces the odoshi lacing silk in the older songs, later cotton joining the choir, indigo and rust, persimmon and soot black, even threads that once dreamed of crimson. These chords are not decoration pretending to be function, but function that refuses to forget beauty. They bind scales into panels, panels into a living shell, and because they are many, they fail politely, where a single great hinge would fail catastrophically. He knows how stories choose shortcuts. A traveller glimpses a display, notes a textured surface, and his mind supplies bamboo, because bamboo belongs to another beloved Japan, the flute, the screen, the grove. But a suit is a pact between gravity and time. It cannot be built from romance alone. Beneath the fabrics, acer hemp, silk, cotton, the plates wait like patient elders. He gestures to a dew to the colour of old tea and points out the trace where kiko once hid beneath cloth, tiny hexagons honeycombed into readiness, and nearby a karuta pattern of small squares like playing cards, reminding him how often protection prefers repetition to spectacle. Leather touches all of it like a translator, introducing hard to soft without either losing their temper, and for sieges or river crossings, when wet wanted its share, the lacquer's black mirror kept the seasons outside where they could do less harm. He remembers the late smoke of the 1500s when aquabuses arrived with new manners, plates thickened, bowls took on more assertive curves, and some suits earned Tamashii scars, test marks like little suns pressed into pride. If lead sometimes shrugged at iron, then leather or bamboo would have been sermons preached to cannons. Instead, the language stayed practical, iron and steel, where voices grew loud, leather and cloth, where conversation needed flexibility, and lacquer everywhere as the quiet moderator. He can hear a craftsman's bench if he closes his eyes, a file whispering, urushi rising like a forest secret, the steady rhythm of a needle coaxing laces through punched eyelets. Work that understands beauty is what endurance looks like from far away. A myth often begins as a compliment that wandered. To imagine bamboo is to wish warriors and landscape to be one seamless kindness, groves as guardians and rain as hymn, and yet the deeper compliment is here in metallurgy, this patient arithmetic of scales and plates and rivets that allowed a human chest to negotiate with history. If you're listening in the hush, eyelids politely heavy, let the correction rest with you. The core defense was always metal, scales and plates taught to cooperate, while leather mediated and ribboned, not shielded. Lacquer kept the weather honest. And if you feel like telling me where you're listening from and what time your room is keeping, I'd love to imagine these suits travelling quietly to your corner of night. If these soft unravellings soothe you, you're warmly invited to subscribe to the entire history so our lantern can find you again when the world asks for quiet. He settles the sewed back on its peg and steps away. The armory exhales, lacquer catching a last drowsy glimmer, and in that dark sheen a bamboo grove does appear, only as a reflection, trembling over the steadier, steel-made heart beneath. He walks the aisle of armour stands as if moving through a dusk-lit grove, and with each measured step the silhouettes shift, subtle at first, then like seasons turning, until the old rumour that all samurai armour look the same loosens the way, a knot relaxes when a patient hand finds the right angle. Here stands a suit that remembers wide saddles and long mornings with the bow, great boxy sewed resting like calm wings, a tall shrine still due, embracing the ribs, fields of lacquered scales shimmering where silk lacing sings, the old O Yoroi of Heian and early Kamakura, born for mounted archers who treated distance as an ally. Its skirt hangs in generous curtains, and one can almost hear leather and silk negotiating with the wind. The posture says, I was made for the saddle's rhythm, for drawing at a gallop, for a battlefield ruled by arrows and the formal courtesies of rank. A few paces on, the lines draw closer to the body, as if the suit has learned to breathe with a man who is dismounted and intends to stay on his feet. This is domaru, armour that wraps instead of boxes, hugging the torso so steps can tighten and quicken, so the spear sets the tempo, so the ground can speak and be answered. Lacing runs in patient avenues of colour, indigo that has known rain, persimmon that remembers festivals, soot black that prefers to be discreet, and each choice whispers a household's manners, a clan signature woven not only into banners, but into the very grammar of protection. Centuries lean forward. War grows less ceremonial, more crowded. Villages and citadels teach new lessons about mud, alleys, and the sudden nearness of strangers. From that schooling emerges the practical eloquence of Tosei Gusoku, modern armour, where scales concede to broader plates, and rivets with hinges learn a steadier prose. The Keikokegawa dus appears like a sensible barrel taught to be kind to ribs, its plates riveted in clean hoops or columns. Dense and Tamishi's proof, marks sometimes bloom like small black suns, where bullets were questioned and did not always win. Shoulder guards shrink from proud boxes to workmanlike panels. The neck guard becomes hine no shikoro, flaring like layered leaves. Sleeves, the kakote ya, adopt male and small plates hidden beneath cloth. A modesty that says, my function is not your spectacle. Helmets shift too, a forest of iron discovering a taste for metaphor. Many ribbed Sujibachi ping bowls catch lamplight like ripples on a pond. The blunt pragmatism of Zunari and the fruit-sleek Momonari speak of workshops that love clarity, and now and then like xia kawari kabuto, right? Blooms, antlers, seashell crests, a crescent sailing like a new moon, declaring that identity has the right to be memorable even when debating death. Regional schools keep their dialects of craft. Haruta, hands, laying plates like calm tiles. Seotome, bowls whose lines feel inevitable. Awai, lacquer deep as late tea. He thinks of Sendai armour, with its deliberate shoulders and the date taste for dark austerity and blue. He remembers near-liturgical reds favoured by some houses, the famous crimson of I Enod Sanada, courage visible from far away like a decision already made. None of it is uniform, all of it is kin, all of, at elbows and knees, hexagon, kiko, tessellates into a polite honeycomb beneath cloth. Elsewhere, square karuta makes a checkered whisper. Some sodan keep their grand, boxy confidence. Others taper into something quicker, as if the shoulder had learned to tuck its pride and make room for alleys. Some kusazuri fall in 7 tall petals. Others prefer more, each tongue a compromise between stride and shelter. Even knots differ, the little hishinui diamonds across a chest, punctuations of cord along a seam, like handwriting that tells you who taught whom to write. A menpo here wears the pesim rese severity of a grimace, another the softer ryubu, calm of a thoughtful face, both honest, both functional, both revealing that intimidation is a chord played differently by different hands. Backplates sprout sashimono, square or swallow-tailed banners bright with identity, so commanders on a misted hillside could read an afternoon like a ledger. In one corner, a coastal suit favours deeper lacquer and minimal fittings. In another, a mountain province lets its iron look like iron, unblushing and blunt. He smiles at how a country's weather teaches its vowels. Rain trains lacquer to be generous. Wind trains chords to listen. Terrain trains the waist to reconcile flexibility with promise. And soldiers, like rivers, carry lessons back. A suit, repaired, after campaign becomes a palimpsest of influence. A Sendai bowl mated to a Kaga breast. A Sayotomi helmet crowned by a local crest. An old Kozain skirt married to new Itamono pragmatism. The field edits fashions with a stern, practical pencil. Even within a single house, time insists on variety. An ancestor's O Yoroi, honoured in ceremony while a grandson wears Okigawa-do to the smoky choir of arquebuses. A shrine keeps the old colours alive, while a garrison takes whatever hue the quartermaster can supply by the dozen. Uniformity belongs to parades more than to the afternoons that decide memory. If movies have taught a chorus of sameness, it is because distance makes details kneel. Up close, the suits argue, gently but truly, about weight and weather, speed and pride, how much of a face to show, how loudly to declare a name. The argument is civil because the speakers are related, and that is what evolution sounds like when silk and iron conduct the conversation. He runs a hand along a breast where small repairs glint like commas, and feels the biography of a single suit. Plates replaced after a march, laces recoloured when dye was cheap, a mon removed when allegiance required silence, a visor changed because someone's nose needed forgiveness. Listen closely and the storehouse becomes an orchard, each tree recognisably itself, each fruit shaped by rain, soil, and the old hands that pruned it. The myth of sameness dissolves into this broth of differences the way salt disappears into soup, no longer seen, but making truth taste right. Evening gathers the landscape into a few kind colours. A wisp of wind tests the eaves and moves on. He imagines a forgotten ridge lined with warriors, some in tall, laced radiance, some in sober plates, some with antlers, some with moons, holding the same breath before the day decides. And in that suspended moment, you could name houses by the shades of their cords and provinces by the manners of their bowls. The field would not see sameness, it would hear a chorus with many parts. And as the last light settles and lacquer returns a small private moon, he understands that variety was not vanity, but survival. Each suit a tuned solution to a life, a clan, a terrain, until night gathered them back into one quiet shining orchard, their differences humming like distant bees in the dark. He lingers before a suit so lavish the lamplight seems to bow, lacquer deep as night tea, gilt fittings winking like courteous stars, a menpo whose moustache curls with theatrical dignity, and hears the modern rumour arrange itself. By the age of smoke and thunder, these were costumes, opera more than armour, theatre pretending to be truth. But when his fingers follow the quiet seams, the suit answers with another biography. Beneath the proud surface, the Aokigawa-do reveals its sober ribs, bands of iron riveted in hoops or columns, interrupting a blow's grammar and scattering it before it reaches bone. Turn the waist, and under the cloth, the kakuruta begins to whisper, playing card plates stitched like a cautious deck, and beside it, the honeycombed kiko, small hexagons that spread harm the way calm spreads through a crowded room. He taps the helmet bowl and feels the many-plate mind of a tsuji bachi, its ridges running like quiet rivers to a tall central rivet. Not fragile pomp, but patient engineering. Even the fanciful silhouettes, crescent moons, antlers, seashell crests, are crowns set upon real fortresses. Tsunari or Swa Mamanari, shells chosen because bullets had taught iron new rules. The age had grown theatrical in colour for a practical reason. Once death travels farther, identity must travel too. His thumb finds a small dark sun pressed into the dirt and knows it for what it is, a tameshi, proof, not an intimidation of enemies, but a negotiation with physics, where a shot argued with the plate and left a dent instead of a verdict. You can almost hear the test. Armour hung, distance measured, powder weighed, the report of a Tanagashima, persuading even the stubborn to thicken bowls and tidy rivets. Ornate did not mean unwarlike, it meant beauty, and survival had learned to speak fluently together. The grand exode of an older world shrink to workmanlike panels. The hineno shikoro flares at the neck like layered leaves, moving with the head instead of sulking against it. Sleeves host islands of mail and plate, kusari, linking the compromises between joints. Inside, the lining is padded to distribute shock rather than flatter, and along the borders, lacquer pools like a steady-handed gatekeeper sealing time out. A socket waits at the back for Sashimono, because in gunpowder's haze, a commander reads an afternoon by flags as much as by voices, and even that declaration of presence is anchored to iron that intends to keep breathing. Across the room, a humbler suit, cloth-faced, self-effacing, confesses its secret when the weave parts, a field of ekaruta glinting like fish in a net, brigandine in kimono's clothing. Another folds like a book, tatami, armour, plates and mail taught to be portable without becoming polite to blades. The Sengoku world, hectic, practical, never lost its appetite for function. It merely hid function in plain sight, the way a general hides intention inside neat squares on a map. He recalls columns marching into powder smoke, volleys counted like heartbeats, pikes teaching horses humility. In such weather, a suit proves itself all afternoon, resisting not only edges but the consonants of lead. Thickened plates at the chest, helmet bowls with slightly more assertive curves, tailby flaps, stiffened where splinters of wood and iron might gossip, small sentences with large results, and lavishness itself, lacquer black enough to carry a private moon, silk laced in indigo, rust, or the vow red some houses favoured, serve the oldest military purpose, to make cohesion legible, to let courage see itself and refuse to scatter. He thinks of workshops praised like generals, saotomi bowls that felt inevitable under the palm, haruta, plates that lay together like reasoned paragraphs, and understands that theatre and mathematics shared a bench. A crest might rise high for memory's sake, but no craftsman who loved his name would let a crest endanger its wearer. Weight is trimmed, balance guarded, the centre held where a body can still turn politely in a doorway or settle a saddle without borrowing help from the wind. He imagines rain joining the parade, beating on lacquer while cords darken and hold. Behind the gloss, the suit remains a citizen of work. Buckles that answer a glove by touch, knots that keep their temper, seams that have rehearsed the day. Even the long kusazuri skirts reveal their schooling, pedals counted to honour both stride and shelter, lower edges shaped to slur a blade away rather than welcome it. It is tempting, far from danger with a cup of modern certainty, to confuse flourish with frivolity. But the field is a brutal editor, useless pieces are deleted by afternoon, show-only suits are collected by evening. Ornate armours persisted because they performed, and they performed because inside their beauty lived habits of survival, dispersal of force, manageable weight, mobility married to tactics, proofs against the new punctuation of powder. He lays his palm to the breast again and lets texture speak where sight grows lazy. The micro-topography of lacquer, the faint give of padding, the hidden geometry under cloth that says, I was made for the long day, not the mirror. Outside memory breathes, a roll of smoke, counted shouts, a commander's fan slicing signals through noise, and in that haze, the suit becomes itself, legible to allies, stubborn to arrows, argumentative with bullets, merciful to the body within. When the myth of only decorative knocks, it meets not vanity, but a practiced host, setting down tea on a table carved from proof. And as the light draws off across the racks, crests and chords drift towards silhouette, leaving the deeper architecture to hold the room, iron and engineering, humming their patient song, until even ornament shows itself for what it truly is, a way of telling courage where to stand. He stands beneath the eaves where rain practices its patient calligraphy across the tiles, and he studies the ranks of chords that stitch plates into speech. From a distance, people say the lacing must have ruined everything, that silk would drink the storm, that knots would loosen and forget their work, that a suit would sag into a soggy shrine to bad decisions. Up close, the rumour thins and vanishes. Silk laces were not left naked to weather. Urushi was brushed into their fibres until each strand learned a modest sheen and a stubborn memory. Between plate and cord and cloth, the armour smiths built a sloped landscape. Kozane overlapped like weatherwise roof tiles. Broader plates stepped like terraces. The shikoro flared in obedient layers. All of it instructing water to go elsewhere. It did not sit and gloat. It slipped away. Tilt a kabuto, and the ribs of a sujibachi usher, droplets downward, past the teihen's tidy crown, over the turned fukigaishi, along the lip of the shikoro, where gravity keeps its appointment. On the breast, the dues, ridges and seams are lacquer-sealed, yet willing to flex. At the waist, the kusazuri petals hang with a slight outward bias, their scalloped edges persuading rain into 100 small departures rather than one sulking pool. The myth imagines a robe, the reality is a roof. Even the grammar of lacing carries weather sense. Dense kebiki odoshi for ceremonial breadth, and the elegance of early centuries. Later, in the smokier sengoku afternoons, more open sugake odoshi that breathes and drains, fewer cords to sponge, fewer channels for water to brag about. Beneath sleeves, the cote hide brigandine and mail behind cloth faced with lacquer. At elbows and knees, kiko and karuta work in discrete islands, each stitched edge knotted and sealed, so damp cannot draft a map of weakness. He remembers a curator's fingertip tapping a darkened line, here a seam recoded across the years, here a lacing end touched with sap black varnish to arrest fray, here a pierced eyelet burnished so cord slides without sawing itself thin. Rain is not an enemy to insult, it is a neighbour to manage. The old manuals teach routines, not miracles. After a march, find shelter under a gallery, a gatehouse, even a traveller's porch bribed with straw mats. Wipe plates with oiled cloth. Unfasten what can rest without sulking. Loosen knots just enough that trapped wet remembers to leave. Hang the suit, not by a single point, but many. Sewed spread like wings, skirts spaced so air can walk between them. Rice, straw, drinks what shy air will not. A little charcoal in the chest keeps the night from rehearsing the wrong song. At dawn, a palm checks for stubborn damp in the creases. A brush rehearses lacquer where scuffs have invited the future in. When cords earn retirement, they are relaced, silk again, sometimes cotton later, and varnish is renewed where fingertips will worry them all afternoon. He imagines campaign tents where armour men become weather readers, learning when to trust a lull, when to open a suit like a book and let its pages breathe, when to line a chest with camellia oil and patience. Garrisons where rafters sigh with hanging shells, each one dripping into trays, each humming with the slow arithmetic by which wet becomes memory. And for hours when clouds forget their manners, river crossings, siege storms, soldiers shrug into straw mino that shed water like a moving field. They grease the vulnerable, choose ground that will not turn traitor, and pace the day, so exertion does not drown the body from within. The land taught prudence, monsoon months favoured simpler lacings, plainer cloth faces, plates arranged to shake off trouble. No one who expected to live asked beauty to do the job of drainage. They asked architecture to do it, then dressed the architecture with manners. He runs his thumb along a row of eyelets and feels the tidiness of reinforcement, metal grommets where later workshops could afford them, thickened holes where earlier hands relied on lacquer to harden the raw edge. None of it feels fragile, it feels rehearsed. Rust, the myth's favourite spectre, did exist. Iron is an honest creature and confesses when neglected. But the suits that survived to meet us learned a second honesty. Maintenance is the other half of protection. Oiling was not vanity. It was liturgy. Airing was not delay. It was survival's quiet arithmetic. And because the armour's surface was a negotiated slope, even hard rains became travellers rather than squatters. He remembers the sound of drizzle on a line of men waiting at a gate, water ticking from shikoro to soda to kusasuri to earth, each drop minding the chaperones that design provided. Later centuries made the math sterner, more plate, fewer laces, broader seams that bear their lacquer like scents in its best coat, yet the old law endured, spread the blow, guide the wet, trust the routine. Stories prefer a single dramatic failure, a suit wilting into cloth, a warrior drowned by his own cords, because failure is easy to tell. The long, workmanlike success of drainage and upkeep is harder to dramatise but kinder to the living. He sets a gauntlet on the sill and watches rain erase itself across lacquer, finds a single bead clinging to a knot, waits while it lets go. Outside, the yard smells of wet earth and pine smoke. A straw cape hangs by the door, like a tired reed bed, dreaming of sun. Somewhere a road scribbles into mist, and along it he imagines a quiet procession of suits returning from weather, iron lightened, cords darkened then drying, plates ticking softly as the last drops choose their exits. Each step a small proof that careful design and ordinary care can teach even rain to behave. He pauses beside a rack of banners, cloth that has learned to stand like a sentence, and considers another neat misunderstanding, that samurai scorned shields because armour made them unnecessary, as if a breastplate could pretend to be a wall. The room offers a subtler answer. Armour and shield are cousins, not twins. One travels with the body, one lends the body a landscape. He kneels to a scuffed plank propped in the corner, its face lacquered against weather, its edges iron-banded like a door that has been taught to refuse. This is a tate, a standing shield, a pavise, meant to be planted where danger concentrates. He pictures it shouldered down a muddy lane and set like a short, stubborn fence while bowstrings hum. Behind it, an archer or gunner becomes a careful clock. Rise, aim, loose, sink, breathe, wait. Farther along, broader panels wait like folded rooms. Mantlets for sieges, travelling cover for streets where roofs nearly touch. Handheld bucklers, the round bossed companions a Western memory expects, were rare in the age of long bows and two-handed spears. But rare is not never. And even when a man's hands chose a natyumi or a natyari over a disc of wood, he still borrowed a shield's older wisdom by other means. A tate could be carried by a squad, stacked into a small palisade, leaned at angles that coax arrows to ricochet into unimportant news. Some were plain boards, spiked to bite earth. Some wore rawhide faces. Some in gunpowder's thickened afternoons wore iron bands like an extra sentence of caution. Fieldworks copied their manners. Carts braced with planks, wicker screens pretending to be reeds until they remembered their duty. Bundled straw, humble as breakfast, promoted to sudden geography. In towns, doors found second careers. Latticed shutters became barricades, temple boards dropped from eaves to turn galleries into galleries of defence. Shop counters dragged into alleys discovered the grammar of cover. The spear line itself, kneeling and standing in measured stanzas, behaved like a living wall. And when arquebuses arrived, a forest of tate sprouted along parapets and at street elbows, so smoke and patience could conspire without asking a rib cage to do all the listening. He remembers a small, clever variant, the pikai date end on a saddle, curved planks riding to a mounted archer's left, more wing than wall, but still an admission that range prefers a margin. Out on riverboats and palisades, taller panels, tate, offered head-high mercy to gunners whose rhythm required both hands. The shield in that choreography was a partner who knew when to lead and when to step aside. Meanwhile, the man wore his private architecture. Dew naked around the chest, Soden shouldering weather and chance, Mempiten lending the helmet its balance, Kusazuri forgiving the thighs. But no cuirass can be all angles at once. No kabuto can make an arrow forget trigonometry. Armour answers blows, already on their way. A shield, even a borrowed one, a gate, a rock, prevents the argument from starting, so the field taught every soldier to read shelter as a second language. Ridges became paragraphs, ditches, commas, house corners, semicolons that brought a breath. A line of sortate planted along a path turned that path into a sentence the defender could punctuate. Behind them, bowmen whispered the old verbs, draw, anchor, loose, and later gunners counted powder like syllables, shouldered the stock, found the sight, and let thunder arrive on schedule. When the volley ended, the wall absorbed the reply, not the body, and because rain keeps its own calendar, shields learned weather too. Lacquer skimmed water away, rawhide swelled into stubbornness, damage was mended with extra boards, iron straps, rope that had practiced the habit of holding. He imagined siege nights when carpenters earned more than poets, sawing, pegging, lashing, turning wagons into moving rooms. Mornings when rows of tar tate blossomed before dawn, each panel a leaf in a defensive grove. Afternoons when a unit advanced by inches, one shield down, one man forward, then another, a small stubborn procession that refused to hurry into pain. The myth of no shields mistakes a choice for an absence. The two-handed instruments of samurai fieldcraft, yumi, yari, naginata, demanded both palms be adults. A buckler would only sulk on the wrist, while leverage and draw weight did their grave arithmetic. Where the hand could not carry a shield, the unit planted one. Where wood could not stand, stone and slope and trench volunteered. Even banners cooperated. A moksashimono on the back declared who you were. A muktate walking before your knees declared where you would be when the next minute arrived. Different roles, complementary tempers. He lays his palm against the parvis and feels nicks where an arrow's hurry ran out of opinions. He recalls another museum's row of panels with narrow vision slits, edges charred by years of demonstration, fronts scumbled by 1,000 fingers testing lacquer's smooth refusal of rain. Armour bore the intimate grammar of impacts, the blunt kiss, the glancing skid, the heated conversation of inches, while shields, literal or improvised, negotiated space itself, what the enemy could see, when he could see it, and how long he would have to see it before the reply arrived. In the smoke of aquabuses, that negotiation grew sterner, tate, thickened, and their spacing became a commander's punctuation, shaping volleys into paragraphs that marched. None of this diminishes the suit. It honours it by refusing to ask one thing to be both wall and home. A man might kneel in armour behind a planted panel, let the world's impatience bruise wood, then rise into his own chosen impatience, arrow, shot or spear, before sinking back into the temporary house courage built. And when the line broke into rooms, doorways, stairs, the confused grammar of interiors, the pavis retired and the armour took the argument indoors. Outside, evening deepens into a colour that remembers rain. He imagines a ridge where banners idle and panels wait, a file of soldiers moving their small fortress forward 3 heartbeats at a time. The wind fingers lacquer, finds no purchase, moves on. From a distance it looks like hesitation. Up close it is craft. The art of letting wood do the first listening so iron can do the last. And when darkness finally pours itself over the field, the hetate stand like modest headstones of prevented harm, while the suits, scuffed grateful, carry their owners through the gate. The difference between wall and garment honoured in the soft ticking of plates drying in the dark. He moves along the row of helmets that keep their own small night, each bowl a dark moon remembering thunder, and the easy rumour, just for show, flutters around their crests like moths about a lantern until, up close, bravado falls away and engineering steps forward, polite but undeniable. He lifts one by its rim and feels the seriousness in the hand. A kabuto is a house first, metaphor second. The bowl, the danhachi, is not a single theatrical shell, but many plates persuaded to agree. 4, 6, 16, even 32 iron slices drawn into a crown by rivets that make a quiet constellation. On one, the rivets stand proud like calm stars. Hoshi bachi, each head strengthening a seam and stiffening a curve. On another, ribs run in even pleats from brim to crown. Suji bachi, channels that teach rain and stray blows to change their minds. Ridges the fingers can read like a measured river. At the summit, the kitehen breathes through a reinforced wreath. The kitehen kanamono, both ornament and anchor for the bowl's tension. Under the brow, a modest mabizashi. Visor shades the eyes and turns a descending cut into a rumor. At the sides, the turned upfukigeishi hold crests and fen glances like tidy parentheses. The neck is not left to fortune. It receives the layered kindness of the shikoro, lamella leaves that fall around throat and shoulders, moving with the head so a glance stays a glance, instead of becoming a quarrel with one's own gear. Some shikoro flare in for hineno, grace bell-shaped to shelter the hinge, where skull becomes spine. Others are boxier, brisker, yet all obey the same courtesy. Break the line of a blow, drain weather, let breath turn freely into decision. Within the bowl, a soft architecture finishes the argument, padding and suspension. Ukebari, stitched so shock disperses and hot afternoons do not make a kettle of iron. At the temples, the shinobi no-oat cords wait to cinch a thoughtful knot beneath the jaw or behind the mask. He rests the helmet on a menpo, and the two become one creature. The mask does not merely scowl for theatre, it steadies the bowl, anchors weight, gives the chin a home so balance has purpose. Everywhere a quiet decision hums. Meeting lips are beveled, so force travels instead of lodging. Brims bend by intention, not accident. Lacquer seals the ambitions against rain. Seams are burnished where fabric will kiss them all day. He taps a bowl and hears a tempered hum, not dull, not brittle, the sound of metal heat taut until it forgot its early shyness. Some bowls wear old medals, faint tamshi scars, where powder's syllable was invited to argue and left a dent without a verdict. Even crests, the dramatic maidates and imwakidate in horns and moons and shells, sit on discipline, not in place of it. Their sockets, koshimaki, plates and clamps, are riveted into the real structure, their weight trimmed like a sentence that refuses excess. An antler may rise to be legible across smoke, but the center of gravity stays tucked, obedient to the next wishes. He imagines the workshop, bellows breathing like an old animal, hammers speaking tidy grammar on the anvil, chalk lines on iron that will one day translate into choices made under an afternoon's pressure. Saotome, hands coaxing inevitability into a bowl. Haruta on plates, knitting like paragraphs that refuse to interrupt, lacquerers brushing, urushi. Until weather grows tired of arguing and slides off, stitches reminding iron to be considerate where it touches flesh, not tears rehearsing chin chords for fingers that must find them without looking when the sky has opinions. What does a helmet owe? It must not blind or deafen or tilt when eyesight is the last democratic sense. It must vent sweat without confessing fear. It must cradle impact and export it into air. It must say no to the blunt grammar of falling things, arrows that forgot humility, stones thrown by hands or gravity, splinters. the accidental elbow of a friend. In siege alleys and horse crowds, the kabuto becomes a portable room where the mind keeps its bearings. To call it just for show is to mistake a banner for the pole. Show lives at the surface, the gloss that lets a commander read his orchard through fog, the horned silhouette that lifts courage like a flag, the crest that carries a story older than the lungs wearing it, but beneath that heraldry ticks a clockwork answering physics with patience. He remembers holding a damaged bowl and reading its diary, a crease that turned a descending edge into a slide, lacquer scraped but not pierced along a suji rib, shikoro chords darkened by rain yet still rehearsing their flex. The ehachimanza, crown ring scuffed where the world knocked politely and was told to wait outside. Helmets, like bridges, tell the truth when examined, spread the strike, refuse the gouge, guard the hinge of life at the back of the skull, and share the weight so the neck does not mutiny by dusk. In the smoky calendar of the Sengoku, bowls learned new manners without forgetting old courtesies, lower profiles to deny bullets, generous angles, more integral brims, kinder linings, crests removable when stealth or logistics asked for humility. If court day needed splendour, fittings could dress. If the march needed silence, ornament lay down and let iron speak. Outside evening settles into fewer colours. The helmets accept dusk like veterans who have practised it before. He sets one back on its stand. The shikoro lames settle, with a soft, articulate murmur, like cards returning to a careful deck. For a heartbeat, the crest seems larger than its reason. Then the eye adjusts and the reasons return. Bowl, rivet, rib, lining, unromantic syllables keeping the skull's weather in check. A reflected candle trembles in the lacquer, tilts, rights itself, and keeps its post, the way a good helmet teaches a head to do when the world knocks. He stands before the suits that learn to listen to thunder without flinching, and he smiles at the tidy rumour that armour died the day firearms were born, as if the first cough of a Heiken Tanagashima sent every cuirass on the islands swooning with embarrassment. What happened instead was a conversation that deepened its tone. Plates thickened at the places where stories try to end. The chest, the brow, curves grew more assertive, so lead would meet angle rather than generosity, and helmets lowered their profiles the way a wise traveller lowers his voice when the wind begins to mean it. His finger follows the staved ribs of an Enyokigawa-do, iron riveted into steady columns, and finds a dark, impressed star, a Matameshi no proof, the small sunburst left by an invited shot. The plate dented, but it did not confess. Inside, padding learns new manners, denser where shock prefers to nest, so the day's violence disperses into politeness before it ever considers the ribs. Undercloth, refusal hides like a proverb. Karuta, squares stitched in brigandine fields. Kiko, hexagons tessellated into a honeycomb that persuades harm to spread out and lose interest. Sleeves that once flirted with showier lacing begin to favour islands of mail and tiny plates, kusari and brigandine sewn to flex and absorb. The quiet topography designed for splinters and ricochet. The stray punctuation gunpowder throws around without asking. Shoulders, once ceremonially broad, learn brevity, sewed trim into panels that won't snag on mantelets or the close geometry of wooden galleries. At the neck, the hineno jikoro flares like a bell of courtesy, guarding the hinge of breath while the head pivots through haze where visibility is a negotiation. Helmets answer in a plainer dialect without losing eloquence, the pragmatic plains of Hensunzu, Tsunari, the fruit sleek, Momonari, inviting glances to skate off. The Kasujibachi sash ribs running like rain gutters to distribute both strikes and weather. Even the flamboyant May date, learn modest tricks, socket secure yet removable, weight trimmed so the neck doesn't petition for mercy by noon. He imagines a shigaru behind rows of cadence, match chords breathing while a captain's fan measures volleys. The air becomes a crowded book, heavy with smoke, and armour adapts by refusing panic or nostalgia. The dew grows more barrel-wise, its edges beveled to coax bullets into sulks rather than conclusions. Some suits carry layered hearts, lamella within plate, plate over brigandine, so an impact must spend itself in multiple negotiations before it can speak to flesh. Lacing, once the dense, beautiful kebiki odoshi, often loosens into shugake odoshi. Fewer cords to drink rain, wider spacing for breath and drainage. Beauty remains, but now it submits its weight to the same audit as every other citizen of the afternoon. Portable armour learns travel's grammar. Tatami. Suits, folding into campaigns. Plates and mail trained to become a book you can carry and then unfold into something stubborn for alleys and boats. Carpenters become co-authors of survival. Planking carts into moving parapets, banding parvises with iron, teaching streets to grow wooden ribs overnight, and armour harmonises with that new music. A man kneels behind Empetate while the matchlock counts. Smoke blooms, answers arrive, and he rises into his own iron, which turns lead sentence into a footnote. Cavalry days encourage prouder breastplate curves. Siege nights invite hidden brigandine where silk would beg off. River crossings find lacquer keeping faith. Oiled cloth remembering to forgive the hour. Even proof has its theatre. Workshops hang plates, pace distances, weigh powder, and record dents like signatures. Buyers read those little craters with their palms, the way sailors read stars. Navigation for the ribs. The neat word obsolete withers in such company. Obsolete things do not sprout families of Okigawa do our variants, or teach bowls to become fruit smooth against ricochet, or persuade sleeves to hide whole continents of mail beneath humble cloth. They do not become more legible to allies in fog, dark lacquers that drink glare, sashimono that rise when voices fail, while becoming less agreeable to the impolite grammar of lead. He remembers cradling a battered bowl whose interior told the truth the outside only hinted. Ukabari, re-stitched where sweat and impact had made an honest marriage. Chin cords thickened with new wraps, a replaced rivet preserving the Suji line's river-like integrity. Change here is not capitulation but craft. Iron learning to keep company with a louder century without abandoning older courtesies of movement and maintenance. Outside he can almost hear volleys roll like slow thunder across a valley, smoke lift in scrolls, lines advance behind planted shields. Men go home, or do not, because of inches and timing, and their armour answers those inches the way a good bridge answers a river's seasonal temper. The suits that survive to stand in this quiet room are not fossils. They are biographies of adjustment, thicker where it mattered, clever where it counted, proof marked by the stubborn little sons of afternoons that did not get the last word. He smooths a thumbs across a dent that kept its promise and thinks, nothing designed to escort a living body through a changing world truly becomes obsolete. It either learns new manners or it leaves. These learned, and so they stayed. He stops before a row that looks less like a gallery and more like a quartermaster's tidy dream. Dozens of breastplates repeating a sensible curve, helmet bowls favouring clarity over flourish. and the neat myth about finery and rags begins to loosen, as if a seam had been waiting for a patient fingertip. People like to picture a bright lord glittering in careful iron while everyone behind him shuffles along in patch cloth. But war is a logistics animal, and it eats regularity and numbers, not isolated splendour. By the smokier centuries, retainers and ashigaru did not arrive naked to the weather. They drew iron from clan arsenals of their own, barrel-built by Okegawa-do, with vertical or horizontal staves riveted into cooperation, pragmatic tsunari and momonari helmets whose planes and fruit-smooth crowns taught glances to slide, sleeves faced in cloth yet hiding kusari kalemail and discreet fields of angikaruta and orikai akiko, and so joints could keep their manners under pressure. When a daimyo meant to hold ground, he did not trust a single noble cuirass catching sunlight. He trusted inventories, stacks of serviceable suits sized by habit, issued with cords and padding assessed like grain and powder. The beauty was quieter, yes, but not absent. Lacquer still persuaded whether to behave. Indigo or soot-black lacing held the arithmetic together. Fittings were restrained, so weight stayed where a long day could afford it. He lifts an Okegawa-do-an and feels the argument in his palms, not a tailor's marvel for parades, but a workshop's promise to a line of ordinary men asked to do extraordinary things. By noon, standardization taught iron to be democratic. Plates were cut to patterns, rivet rows learned to march. Honest tsunari bowls could be made in number. Tatami, folding sets travelled like books for patrols, boats, and sudden errands of danger. Armourers stamped small marks, shop crests, inspection scratches, sometimes numbers, so a quartermaster could count what the afternoon would require and mend what yesterday confessed. Repairs were not an embarrassment. They were a biography of usefulness, a replaced lame bright against older lacquer like sky after rain, a new chin cord thick with fresh wraps where an elder had told the truth too often, padding re-stitched where shoulders do the day's arithmetic. Some suits were bought by households, others were issued and recalled, passing along the season like tools. Heraldry adjusted to the mathematics of scale. Not every chest wore a proud mun. Many bore generic fittings, or none, so the same cuirass could serve next year's recruit without offending last year's loyalties. He imagines racks by the door, smelling of oil and hemp, shelves with cords coiled like patient snakes, a ledger that knew every suit's manners. When volleys began to matter and motate sprouted along parapets, it was the ordinary iron, the repeatable iron, that held the line long enough for brave names to matter at all. Even colour learned humility. Dyes that could be supplied in number, cotton cords where silk would prove diva-ish in rain, cloth facings that let brigandine argue honestly without asking for compliments. If a line of men looks uniform in old paintings, that is not poverty. It is a plan with a supplier. He thinks of towns whose forges pulse like extra hearts for whole provinces, of smiths who measured afternoons into ribs and rivet spacing, of lacquerers who turned weather away from stacks of dew that would never meet a court, but would certainly meet tomorrow. He remembers the market's second conversation, the not quite new. Suits bought from older houses, refurbished, relaced, helmets migrating between banners with crests removed and sockets left clean. Sleeves reinvented when someone clever stitched mail islands into cloth that looked like a gardener's jacket but argued like iron. Rags existed, of course. Poor men have always made do, and emergencies breed improvisation. But a garrison cannot be defended by improvisations alone. A road cannot be held by romance. The surviving pieces tell the truth, practical, Okegawa do, in numbers, plain bowls that can take a dent and keep their promise, inventories with the scuffs of many hands, issue tags, inspection stamps, mended laces touched with varnish where fingertips will worry them again tomorrow. He runs his palm along a curve meant for average ribs, a kindness by arithmetic, and feels the policy inside the craft. Give many men enough protection to make formations real, to make tactics possible, to make courage something other than self-harm. In smoky lanes where arquebus thunder rolled, it was modest suits that turned lead into hesitation and hesitation into time. On windy ridges, rows of ordinary iron-let spears keep their geometry. Lords still wore splendid armour, ceremony needs its poetry. But the poetry rode on prose that could be issued at dawn. Evening settles into usefulness, a gate clicks, a yard smells of oil and straw. Somewhere a clerk writes a tidy column of numbers, meaning 100 chests will breathe through tomorrow's weather. He imagines those suits marching in the half-light, dark lacquer absorbing the last glare, cords darkening then drying, plates ticking softly in step, and understands that dignity in war is not a private virtue of the few, but a shared habit of the many, a low, steady shine, moving forward together, until the field decides and the armory becomes, for one more night, a house of ordinary miracles. He lingers between two suites that seem to regard each other across an invisible channel, the rounded hush of a late Tosei Gusoku. On one stand, the seamless confidence of a European field harness on the other, and he smiles at the convenient quarrel strangers like to stage between them, inferior and superior, as if armour were a single exam with one right answer. The ground is the first teacher, and different grounds ask for different manners. In the islands, battlefields, braid forest shade with terrace paddies, narrow lanes with sudden hill temples. Lines breathe in shorter distances. Cavalry threads trees instead of oceanic pastures, and the grammar of weapons speaks Yumi, Yari, Naginata, long before gunpowder adds its blunt consonants. The Japanese suit answers with layered logic, lamella where a bend must remain a bend, broader plates where a strike tends to land square, brigandine, karuta, kiko, undercloth where joints will negotiate all afternoon. By the 16th century, the modern eloquence becomes forthright. Okegawa-do, barreled into hoops, or columns of riveted plates. Suji-bachi, bowls ribbed like careful rivers that stiffen and drain. Hineno, shikoro, neck guards falling like scaled leaves so the head can still say yes and no when the hour grows crowded. Beside it, the European suit keeps its own good reasons. Vast plains welcome the lance, and plate learns to turn a charge into a glancing complaint. Pike blocks prefer broad, continuous surfaces. Crossbows and early arquebuses persuade bowls and breasts to thicken and curve like fruit that asks to be glanced rather than swallowed. Listen gently, and the two suits are not insulting each other. They are agreeing on physics while proposing different accents. Weight sits in the hands with similar honesty, 20 to 30 kilograms for a working Japanese set, a comparable burden for a European harness tuned to gallop and push of pike afternoons. Scholars, politely stubborn, still debate metallurgy and heat treatment. Sao Tome, Haruta, Innsbruck, Augsburg, but the field keeps a simpler diary. Did the suit let a man move, survive, and come home with breath enough to thank the stove? Late Japanese armour answers gunpowder without sulking. Plates thicken at the chest, bowls lower their profiles. Tameshi, proofs bloom like small black suns, where shots were invited to argue and left a dent instead of a verdict. under kimono face sleeves, kusari lynx islands of defence. Beneath travel-wise coats, brigandine tiles a hidden honeycomb. Lacing loosens to shugake doshi. So rain is urged to depart. Lacquer rehearses its old ministry of weather. Tactics fold around these choices. Tate, pavises sprout along walls and lanes so a shigaru can breathe between volleys. Spear lines and matchlocks play call and response behind portable cover. In that choreography, armour does not retire. It changes jobs. Less pageantry, more partnership with wood and smoke. Europe's harness, later too, thins here and thickens there as pistols and muskets learn ruder grammar. Closed helms open a touch to hearing. Three-quarter suits concede thigh to speed. Proofed breasts advertise their own small meteors. Each continent's armour converses with terrain, economy and drill. And Japan's castles grow up and inward. Labyrinth stairs, angled galleries, arrow slits like careful eyelids. So a suit that can climb, pivot, kneel, rise again without arguing with itself is the thoughtful choice. Europe's fortresses sink outward into star forts. In those low geometries, plate carries different burdens. Inferior is the wrong noun. Different, measured, and sincere is the right one. He runs a knuckle along the Japanese doe's beveled seam and feels how a strike would be persuaded to travel on. He touches the European breast's medial ridge and hears the same intention in another accent. Under both, padding speaks muffled arithmetic, turning impact into fractions a body can afford. Under both, maintenance is half the miracle. Oil at dusk, airing when weather permits, relacing and re-riveting where fatigue confesses itself. If one seeks spectacular demonstrations, a sword biting a polished plate face, an axe chewing through a prayer, one mistakes theatre for chores. Real afternoons prefer leverage at joints, angles that spend bullets, teamwork with shields and earthworks, the plain virtue of not breaking. And because the human neck is beloved on both shores, both helmets evolve toward the same courtesy. Spread the strike, keep vision plausible, let sweat escape, make balance an ally rather than a debt. He imagines, just for a breath, the two suits trading landscapes, the European harness pausing in cedar shade, surprised by ladders and tight turns, the Japanese do stepping onto a wind-broad meadow, surprised by lances authored by open space. Each would adjust its manners and still find some edges unfriendly. That is not weakness, so much as proof that tools are honest about their homes. Outside evening arranges the world into a few kind colours. Somewhere, a ridge remembers matchcord smoke. Elsewhere, a field remembers hooves. In the lacquered curve of the gusoku, a small candle steadies. In the mirror, calm breast beside it, the same flame steadies again. Two answers to the same question, spoken softly in different dialects, both still keeping their promises as they wait for the next pair of hands. He stands before a row of cuisses and cuirasses that catch the lamp like obedient pawns, and he considers how distance simplifies, how a battlefield remembered in charcoal persuades the mind that everything was black, the way night, seen from far away, seems like a single note. Up close, the iron sings in a softer choir. Lacquer is not a one-word language. Urushi can be polished into void, dark, kuro, that drinks both glare and rain, but it can also warm into shuin vermilion, like an ember under cloud, settle into chapa browns, the colour of tea that has been thinking on the table, or cool into wind conch indigo so deep it reads as midnight with a memory of blue. Under the fingers, some bowls keep the fine pebbled ishimeji that teaches light its manners. Others breathe with nashiji sparks. Pear skin glints of gold dust scattered in a small private galaxy. Along seams, fittings, fucrin, rims, washers, rivet heads sometimes carry a thread of gilt that catches a shy star, not vanity, but punctuation, a narrow brightness that helps an officer assemble scents from smoke. He turns a sleeve, and the Tangodoshi Elacing answers with its own palette of decisions, tight, kibiki, or doshi, in aka ito, red, or nakanito, indigo, sober, or chaito, brown, austere, or kuro ito, in black, even whites and straw tones saved for ceremonies and brief parades because mud is a ruthless editor. Later, when campaigns demanded thrift and breadth, the area sugake odoshi traded dense ribbons for sensible intervals. Colour stayed, but learned to breathe. Indigo for durable dye, red for resolve legible from far away, soot black for parts that preferred to disappear into duty. Clans taught colours to stand for them the way voices stand for people. The I and sometimes Sanada marched in burning reds that made courage visible. Date tastes leaned toward indigo and black, lifted by a lunar gold at the brow. Tokugawa kept the quiet authority of deep dark lacquer and bright hollyhock crests. Elsewhere, lacquer like old tea and chords, like dusk on water, made their own grammar until an orchard of hues could be read into order across a misted hillside. Even one suit keeps the conversation going. A tie doom in practical brown to hide scuffs and oil, sewed and edged with a breath of gold where a lord wanted his men to find him. Coat faced in everyday cloth, yet stitched beneath with islands of mail and plate that glitter faintly when the lamplight admits its secrets. Practicalities revise the poem. Red, radiant on parade, asks for honest pigments and careful upkeep. Indigo's loyalty to weather makes it a quartermaster's friend. Blacks and browns forgive rain, dust, and the arithmetic of cleaning. Lacquer ages as soldiers do. Vermilion learns dusk, brown leans toward night. Campaign dust teaches any colour humility by noon. Yet intention persists. Sashimono. Banners still carry identity. Cords still declare allegiance at the seams. A glint at the visor's edge still signs the craftsman's name in a script the weather cannot blur. He runs a thumb along Hishinui, diamonds stepping across a chest, and imagines dyers and lacquerers in rooms of sap and smoke, testing hues in bowls of water and in true daylight, choosing not what flatters mirrors, but what cooperates with months of marching. If black spread widely, it was for the common sense of it, glareless in sun, forgiving in maintenance, dignified beside any banner. Yet the room refuses monotony. Even blacks disagree among themselves, from wet piano gloss to old stone mat to hammered sheens that remember the anvil's percussion. Brown suits lean like quiet elders. Red laces keep a small ember where fingers have polished them with fastening and unfastening. A trace of marquee flourishes on a visor not to boast, but to keep a household's face from being misplaced in fog. Outside, the world reduces toward evening, fields folding into three patient colours, water gathering the sky's last word, and he imagines a ridge never painted, ranks knitted of indigo and soot, interrupted by petals of red, by tea-brown plates, by the occasional wink of gold. From far away, yes, it reads as dark. Up close, it is a garden at dusk, deliberate and alive. And as the armory's lamp grows small inside every curve of lacquer, he hears the colours behave the way good soldiers do, distinct when called upon, harmonious when it matters, each shade keeping its post until the night invites them to fold into one another and wait for morning. He lifts a breastplate and feels the hinge give a courteous bow. The the way a door greets a familiar hand, and the old myth that armour arrived in one stubborn size loosens like a knot taught to breathe. Suits were not statues, they were wardrobes of decisions, and one could wrap and enclasp rather than cage, and damaru, embracing from the side, or kegawa-do, closing with hooks and toggles so the rib cage found its honest circumference. Along the shoulders, the watagami, those padded bridges, could be lengthened or replaced, letting the bowl of chest and the slope of back meet in truce. At the flanks, laced seams could be relaced with air between stitches, sugake odoshi, or drawn tighter in dense rows, kebiki odoshi, to fit the hour's owner. He runs a finger along a row of eyelets and hears the quiet arithmetic of chords. Add a lamed here, remove a lame there, a kakusazuri. Skirt gaining or surrendering a pedal to change how a stride behaves in a narrow street. A pair of sewed, those shoulder shields, traded for smaller or larger panels when a man's duties demanded different manners. Even the helmet keeps the courtesy of fit. Inside the kakabuto, the ukabari and lining is domestic engineering, pads quilted and retied, shinobi no oche chin cords rewrapped, mask straps adjusted so the menpo steadies the bowl without demanding the jaw to clench. If a brow needs more mercy, a cushion lives there. If summer asks for breath, a layer thins. The body is not standard. The room around it should not be either. Sleeves, kota, confess the same pragmatism. Lengths altered, so wrists don't sulk. Kusari. Male islands shifted beneath cloth where elbows prefer to negotiate. Thigh guards, high date, rebuckled to court different hips. Shin guards, sanite, retied, so bones are cradled rather than contradicted. Nothing here is one size. Everything is conversation. And when inheritance arrives, as it often does in houses that keep their promises, armour becomes a family of parts that learns new names. A father's breast opens at the flank and accepts a narrow plate, so a son's winter will fit. A grandfather's kote keep their souls but receive new palms. A skirt's tongues are relaced to a different count, so a different pair of legs can run without feeling argued with. Old lacing grows tired and is renewed. Colours drift, indigo to soot, soot to tea brown, not for fashion alone, but because dye, season, budget and campaign keep their own calendars. He imagines a workbench where a suit lies taken down like a book, panels fanned, cords coiled, fittings sorted in shallow dishes. A smith and a tailor of iron, measure rib and shoulder with the same attention a mother gives a winter coat, nudging holes and hardware so weight distributes like kindness instead of debt. The hishinoi, cross stitches on a chest, can migrate a finger width to suit a new sternum. The buckle on a mick throat flap can shift to ease the swallow. Modularity also invites the field's mix and match wisdom, a saotomist bowl married to a kaga breast, because that is what the shop could supply in time. Karuta, brigandine stitched under a sleeve that used to be only cloth, a cousin's sewed, drafted into service because he fell and the household refuses to waste what still wants to protect. Campaigns stretch across weather and fit changes again, not as disorder but as care. Thicker padding for cold, leaner for heat, cords given a breath of slack when clothing multiplies, extra ties knotted where a hand can find them blind at dusk. Armourers keep ledgers not only of numbers but of bodies. Masatsugu prefers the right shoulder lowered a hair, Jiro's left forearm swells by evening, Fahisa shorten the pawatagami by a finger. Love written in shop talk. He remembers a museum suit whose biography was visible if you asked gently. Hinge bright metal where someone broader wore it for years. A new plate added inside the waist where another chest wanted room. Relay skirts shading from old indigo to newer soot, exactly where fingers worry, knots, or mempo, drilled with an extra strap because cheekbones had opinions. One size would leave discomfort or abandonment. These pieces betray a culture of editing, iron to a particular breath, silk to a particular stride, leather to a particular afternoon sweat. Even the drill yard teaches fit. Climb stairs in armour that belongs to myth, and the steps write reprimands into your thighs. Draw a Yumi against a chest strap that denies the ribs, and the arrow's line scolds. So the suit listens, cords adjust, a buckle migrates, a hinge learns a kinder angle. He thinks of a siege night when a unit returned soaked and shivering, armour opened like windows, padding exchanged like blankets, knots retied, so blood can warm its edges again. Of a wedding day, when ancestral pieces are worn for ceremony, then taken back to the bench and resized for work. Tools that love their owners are never offended by change. They are relieved. Outside, evening presses its gentle palm to the shutters. Somewhere a clerk closes the ledger on measurements exact at noon and exact again tomorrow. In lamplight, the suit looks less a monolith than a patient instrument, strings tuned and retuned, bridge adjusted, pegs tightened, ready to sing for whoever steps into its circle of promise. And as the room settles, he sees a faint procession disappearing down a corridor, each figure wearing iron that remembers their shoulders. A quiet file of tailored moons moving toward a door that smells of rain and distance. He pauses in a quieter corner where a single naginata leans like a reed with resolve, and beside it a pair of sleeves lie folded, mail stitched beneath modest cloth, palms reinforced where work expects teeth, small patient things that make a rumour change its mind. People say the past kept armour from women, as if caution were a law, but the room whispers otherwise, rare, yes, and real. He imagines a hilltop, keep in a season of hard news, shutters latched against a wind carrying more than weather. Within the galleries, women move, as caretakers do, when a house must learn new manners, water fetched, stones stacked, powder measured with the same patience given to rice, yet some of them dress the body for the hour. A short do, borrowed and belted over layered kimono. Kote, that hide. Kusari, under indigo. Sunedian tied over tabi, so ankles remember courage. A light kabuto, or lacquered. Jingasa, whose brim teaches splinters to reconsider. A scarf becomes a hood. A mask is not for theatre but for smoke and grit. Those democracies the face must negotiate. Names hover between chronicle and legend. Women who learned the naginata's polite, decisive arc, who kept gates where corridors narrow into honesty, who stood on terraces where a spear reaches farther than a shout. The stories disagree on embroidery. Scholars argue softly about which plates and which monasteries. But the argument itself is proof of life. People do not quarrel long over ghosts. He lifts a sleeve, ordinary cloth to the eye, the way a doorway is ordinary until a siege begins. Beneath Karuta, squares and rings of mail glitter like fish beneath calm water. He can almost hear the lessons shared in low voices. Don't meet a blade with bravado, meet it with angles. Step, present the shaft. Let the curve finish what balance begins. And if the world collapses to a breath, seek seams as any soldier would. Use the short knife where armour must exhale. Live inside training rather than the rumour that training refused you. Inventories speak with fewer adjectives and more keys. Racks of tatami travel armour that fold like books. light cuirasses for messengers, and sentries of whatever gender the emergency requires, padded jackets hardened with layers, more apron than parade, meant to turn chance into bruise rather than verdict. These were not costumes. They were tools waiting for anyone reliable enough to be handed powder or doors. Down some remembered corridor comes the music of preparation, buckles finding holes by touch, cords retied by candlelight, a child sleeping through the rehearsal because patience is the lullaby war cannot forbid. On the parapet, a line of Tate turns a walkway into a hallway under the sky. Behind them, a woman lifts a matchlock, the match hissing its dry syllable, shoulder braced against a pad stitched into a borrowed coat. Powder is weighed by a hand that has measured many things and knows attention is the oldest strength. When the volley is done, she settles behind wood while the world's reply spends itself on lacquer and habit. In another hour she carries water again, wipes plates with oiled cloth, and with the same strokes repairs tomorrow's courage. The myth that women never wore armour begins with parades and ends in paintings. The truth naps in storerooms and wakes in storms. A museum note murmurs of a breast resized, a watagami shortened, a lining quilted anew, a smaller form slipping into a suit edited by household hands that knew how to make tools listen. Even where iron stayed on men, defence belonged to whoever stood the wall. Gauntlets over sleeves, forearm guards that turned flying splinters into gossip, thick coats that made arrows reconsider their manners. In countryside skirmishes and bandit hours, kit grew humbler still, wooden bucklers from the storeroom, baskets worn as helmets because urgency is a tailor, staffs capped with iron to persuade danger back the way it came. He thinks of siege days, sorted into chores, each chore a prayer said with the hands. Of women, the roles misplace whose fingerprints remain on hinges that didn't fail, on laces varnished against rain, on steps that could still be climbed in the dark when the wall asked for more. Some evenings, the lens widens, mounted yards where a lord's daughter learns the naginata with the same steady wrists as her brother, temple schools that keep the weapon like a psalm, an old instructor who approves of attention and cares a little what the census says. Rare, yes, but real. He lets the folded sleeves rest. The room returns to its slow breathing. Lacquer becomes a small river for the lamplight. The naginata's edge holds its moon. Outside, the town listens for news lowered from a ridge. Inside, a storeroom remembers that defence is a family verb. History is tidy in books, but busy in houses. It makes exceptions the moment the gate shakes. He closes his eyes and sees a stair, narrow, turning, loud with feet, and among them a pair that move without apology, skirt hitched, shaft balanced, armour edited to the body that needs it. The stair opens into night. The wind lifts hair against a lacquered brim. The line steadies. Somewhere a child rolls over and keeps sleeping because someone below remembered that courage has many voices, and tonight one of them wears iron. He stops in a quieter corner where a single naginata leans like a reed that has made up its mind, and beside it a pair of sleeves rest folded, mail stitched beneath modest cloth, palms thickened where work expects teeth, small unshowy proofs that make a rumour change its mind. People like to say stealth meant nakedness, that ninja never wore armour, as if silence and iron were old enemies. But the room whispers otherwise, rare, yes, yet real. He lifts a workman's jacket, plain cotton, farmer brown, nothing boastful, and the inside answers, with a private glint, discreet brigandine cards, karuta, sewn like a hidden deck, in another, faint kiko Hexagons tessellate a rain-coloured honeycomb of refusal. Stealth did not always ask for bare skin. It asked for protection that refused to introduce itself. A chain shirt, kusari katabira. Sighs when unfolded, its links smothered under lining, so movement sounds like cloth, not coins. Forearm guards hide plates beneath quilting. Teko. Over the hands turn a parry into a bruise instead of a wound. A narrow band of iron, hachigane, disappears beneath a towel or hood, teaching the forehead not to learn hard lessons too quickly. A light jingasa, lacquered like a reasonable roof, shelters the skull without announcing itself as a helmet. Even sonite for the shins are wrapped in quiet cloth, so wooden stairs will not gossip to neighbours and dogs. This is not a lord's parade. This is survival, edited for a mission, iron covered with manners so the knight won't complain. And ninja work wandered across the calendar, slipping through kitchens and storerooms, listening to a palisades breathing from the dark, finding timbers that keep secrets and giving them a different job. Escort duty, an ambush where the hour would be loud no matter how soft the feet began. In those louder errands, men wore more, a folding tatami. Do That is a book by day and a breast by dusk, sleeves with islands of mail, a half veil to keep lime, and splinters honest, even a borrowed menpo when a skirmish and anonymity travelled together. Stealth cares about silhouette more than theatre. Most nights are not black, but patchwork, eaves that are shadow, lanes the grey of dust, fences the tea-brown of old wood, so garments that read as part of the yard prove wiser than vaunted void. But stealth also cares about returning, and returning sometimes needs iron. He hears the soft instruction of a dojo that smells of straw and oil. Pad what clinks, wrap what shines, quiet what rubs, grease the hinge, trim the knot, rehearse the climb until the jacket remembers it, then decide, piece by piece, what has earned its weight. An assassin among shutters cannot afford a jangling torso. A saboteur slipping a gate needs knees that forgive. A courier crossing a kill lane at dawn wants a hat that will misunderstand an arrow on his behalf. Daylight disguises, carpenter, porter, pilgrim, accept armour as long as it behaves. Brigandine, hiding under a worker's coat. Mail vanishing beneath a pilgrim's vest. Hachigan, tucked beneath a towel that pretends to be a band. And on siege nights everyone becomes practical and the words blur. Men we would lazily call ninja shoulder Tate with Ashigaru kneel behind wood while match cords whisper and rise to the same thunder. A light cuirass under drab cloth persuades a splinter to reconsider its ambitions. On ambush roads, a short breast and armoured sleeves make the difference between melting into bamboo after the first blow and being footnoted by a ditch. He thinks of a commoner's coat in a museum whose seams confess another story. Stitch lines so regular they almost admit iron, a cuff thickened where handshakes can turn treacherous, shoulders with a second skin because ladders tell the truth about gravity. The myth shrinks when fingers read. Stealth is not nudity, it is negotiation between weight and silence, time and distance, risk and the wish to see morning. Even the colour lesson is stubbornly practical. Deep indigo drinks, moonlight without becoming a hole. Browns sit down among boards and fields. Soot dark cloth becomes wall when walls are tied. Over all of this, an Atsuken hood teaches hair and ears to keep their counsel. He imagines the choreography. A figure taking only what the night will carry without complaint. Brigandine at ribs, mail at wrists, splints at shins, a quiet hat. and leaving the rest for louder errands. The body can still climb, still crouch, still vanish into the architecture of hedges and eaves, and if the hour betrays itself and turns to melee, the iron turns surprise into bruise, disaster into detour. He runs a thumb along a jacket's lining and feels the tiny plates slide like fish beneath calm water. The sound is fabric's whisper, not metal's boast. Somewhere, an instructor reminds a student that a mission is a bag with strict sides. Fill it with what you need, not with what fear would hoard. Sometimes that bag is empty of armour, sometimes it isn't. He thinks of dawns, after long nights when a figure returns with soot under the nails and a small dent hidden in a sleeve, proof that a quiet plate stood where a longer story might have ended. He thinks of corridors where footsteps must blur into the wind, and of sudden courtyards where the wind stops and everything demands an answer at once. In both, gear answers to purpose, not to rumour. Outside the yard keeps its old stealth. Wet earth, plank shadow, the indigo of early morning, while inside a modest suit waits its turn to contradict the easy claim. It is not proud, it is prepared. He sets the jacket down and it lies the way a good tool rests, unassuming, certain, patient for the next set of hands, and he imagines a lane thinning toward fields, a figure passing like a sensible thought, cloth drinking light, iron breathing under cloth, vanishing at the bend where bamboo begins to talk. He opens a chest that smells faintly of sap and old tea, and the myth about quick rust and collapsing seams seems to wilt in that fragrance, as if rumour itself had been left out in the weather. Iron is honest. It will take any excuse to bloom red if neglected. But these suits were not left to chance. They were tutored against decay. Along a breast his finger finds urushi in thin stubborn rivers, sealing plate and scale the way roofers teach rain to mind its manners. Under lamplight the surface holds a quiet gloss, not for vanity, but because a glassy skin asks water to slip rather than sit. Even lacing was coached. Silk brushed with varnish until the fibres remembered to repel wet. Eyelets burnished so friction would not chew them raw. After marches the liturgy began, oiled cloths wiping the day back into the past, plates parted just enough to let trapped damp go looking for someone else, suits hung not by a single hook but by their architecture spread wide, sewed, opened like books, cursasery, pedals spaced so air could learn their names. Rice straw drank what air could not. Bowls of charcoal beneath the racks kept the little climate dry and reasonable. In spring, scuffed edges received another whisper-thin coat of urushi. In autumn, cord ends were retouched where fingertips had rehearsed too often. He remembers a side room in a garrison, warm with breath, cool with shade, where helmets sat inverted, so that Kanyukabari's linings could dry. Shikoro, lambs splayed so moulds, had nowhere private to colonize. A jar of camellia oil waiting like a quiet insurance policy. Brushes sleeping in cloth. A ledger open to kindness disguised as bureaucracy. No. 43, rim retouched, no. 57, left hinge replaced. Num 19, cord end sealed. All pieces aired. This is not the biography of objects that fall apart. It is the patience by which objects develop loyalty. In households too, armour was family rather than furniture. A father's coat of plates, bright where hands polished it in greeting, opened at the flank to admit a son's broader breath. Laces changed colour as dye economies shifted, indigo yielding to soot, soot to tea brown, missing lamella replaced by newcomers whose fresh sheen told you exactly when they joined the choir. Dents became footnotes rather than verdicts. Here a crease that turned a blade aside. There a small black son of Tameshi, Aye, where Powder's argument left a bruise but not a breach. Rust appeared, of course. Iron confesses when care sleeps. But the craft anticipated confession with easy penance. Smooth the chip, prime the whisper, lay urushi in coats, so modest you count them with breath. Relace and touch the knots with varnish, so time slides off. Pick tied stitching and renew the heart, so a bowl can learn a new owner's skull. Even storage learned manners. Chests sat on low feet, so floors could not lend them their damp. Lids fitted close, but not so tight that trapped air rehearsed mildew. Stands imitated shoulders, so the day would not crease a suit into discontent. Coasts taught rinsing and oil. Mountains taught softer mixes when hearth air tempted cracks. The climate wrote small notes and the craft wrote back. He can still see a curator lift a soda to a window and let sun read the surface. Tiny repair islands blooming like mirages, proof not of collapse but of stewardship repeated for decades. He has handled sleeves whose mail once freckled orange and then returned to service under brush and oil, seen gussets neatly replaced. Hishinui, diamonds migrated a finger width, so stress would not rehearse the same mistake twice. Tools that move through years collect such annotations, the punctuation of survival. The myth wants drama. One rain turning an army to ruin, but rain met lacquer and was redirected. Mud met oil and found no purchase. Seams met habit and would not come loose while watched. If a suit had been merely ceremonial, a single season would have scolded it into honesty. Instead, we inherit pieces with 3 generations speaking in their corners. A grandfather's patina where hands always lifted, a father's new plate where lead once argued, a son's fresher chords where the body remembers to pull. He imagines an evening after campaign, a yard smelling of straw and wet leather, men unhooking their days and handing them to the armory's quiet priests, the brush, the cloth, the oil, voices settling into low weather, laughter waking because nothing broke that cannot be mended. Along the rafters, the armour ticking softly as droplets choose their exits. Far away someone writes that iron is doomed to red dust. Up close, iron and people keep teaching each other patience. He lowers the lid, and the latch answers with a modest click, like a sentence that knows tomorrow's grammar. Outside, mist pulls itself thin over the road. Inside, lacquer holds a small moon steady on a curved plate, and in that faithful gleam is the real story. Not a rush to ruin, but a long conversation between craft and care, one that outlives the men who began it and leaves their grandchildren something that still remembers how to protect. He lifts a mask from its hook, and for a heartbeat, the lamplight mistakes it for a face, moustache lacquered into patience, teeth carved into a small theatre of warning, yet the easy verdict, made to frighten, fades as the weight settles into his palm, and the engineering begins to speak. Inside, the rim is rounded where skin must forgive long hours. Cheek posts, odome, wait to catch the helmet cords. Along the jaw, a steady shelf receives what the neck should not carry alone. The mask and kabuto are partners, not decorations, in a choreography the afternoon demands, not the oshinobi no-o, under the chin or at the crown, anchor bowl to menpo, move the load forward and down so a rider's twist or a footman's sharp pivot does not ask the vertebrae to sign the whole ledger. The throat is not left to luck. From the lower edge hangs the chayodere kakehen, scaled leaves that flex with a swallow and deny the blunt grammar of splinters, stairwell jabs and ladder lessons. Tilt the piece, and a little architecture of air appears. Hana, no ana, nostril vents, and en Aisnagashi, no ana. Drains where breath and sweat chews exits without fogging resolve. A hollow that keeps the mouth from being pressed into iron, turned lacquered edges that leave salt and weather nothing to brag about. Some noses are practical guests, lift the hana into drink, spit dust, speak clearly, set it back when stones and arguments resume. Even the dramatic lines have jobs. Resse, creases deflect and stiffen. A jutted chin becomes a bumper against an accidental haft. A calmer non-ryubu face answers the same physics without raising its voice. He imagines the places where this modest fortress matters most. A stare's blind turn, with blows rising from hands you cannot see. Palisade galleries where splinters fly democratically. Narrow doorways where a friend's elbow has as much right to bruise as an enemy's blade. The mask edits that chaos. A rattle at the jaw rather than a broken tooth. A lacquer nick instead of an early ending. In the saddle too, the partnership steadies vision. A lonely helmet can wobble at the gallop, anchored to the mask. Head and bowl become one predictable instrument. He strokes the inner padding, the Chukabari-a's little cousin, and feels the soft arithmetic that converts shock into fractions. Straps accept new knots as cheeks change with fatigue. Lacquer inside and out writes a weather treaty. The curve leaves room to breathe without inviting slop. He has read their diaries in steel, scratches along a jaw where a bad angle left without a souvenir. Smoke dark at the vents from siege weeks, salt freckles at the rim where breath confessed long marches and was forgiven by maintenance. Theatre, when present, is deliberate and secondary. A lacquer moustache breaks rain and sweat into smaller worries before they find the lip. A row of comic teeth becomes corrugation that discourages sliding impacts. Colours are practical. Dark to erase glare, red to keep a unit legible through weather's handwriting. And when humility or shadows ask, the sockets that can host a proud May date are left empty while the mask keeps only its efficient geometry. He considers the breath that gathers behind it, winter warmth that rises just shy of the eye, summer heat that venting persuades into a quiet constant prayer. Speak through it and iron ribs lend baritone to orders, bite it in panic and the rim reminds the jaw where not to linger. If intimidation were the heart, the day would have delivered its verdict long ago and we would inherit pretty stories with poor bones. Instead we inherit tools. Hanbo, half masks for a jaw's worth of help. Full menpo for hours when gravel, ash and the errand ahead crowd the horizon. Along with hands drilled to not by feel until face house and helmet house become one house that refuses to fall. He remembers trying one on in a quiet room, the small shift in balance that, after a breath, felt like relief, sound growing intimate but not trapped, the strange compassion of iron drawing a calm perimeter for decision. Outside, wind taps the shutters and moves on. Inside, the mask returns to its hook, lacquer cooling, moustache amused by nothing. From across the room, it is theatre. In the hand, it is hinge, brace, drain, shield. And as the lamplight thins, and the suits settle into silhouettes with patient spines, he thinks of faces that stayed faces because iron chose to meet the world first, of voices that kept their shape behind grins and scowls carved mostly for the enemy's doubt. The theatre a bonus, the function that kept breathing,